There are moments in life when cruelty wears a smile, when power believes it can crush dignity beneath its polished shoes, when wealth becomes a weapon and mockery becomes sport. This is the story of one such moment. A moment when a CEO stood in his glass tower, looking down at a black woman who cleaned his floors, and thought he had the right to destroy her spirit with laughter. But what he didn't know, what he couldn't see through the fog of his own arrogance, was that standing beside her was a boy whose mind could reshape his entire world. And sometimes, the universe has a way of teaching lessons to those who believe they're above being taught. It was a Tuesday morning when Marcus Sullivan walked into his company's main office building. With the kind of swagger that comes from never having been told no. His suit cost more than most people earned in 3 months. His watch could have fed a family for a year. He was the CEO of Sullivan Tech Industries, a man who had built an empire on innovation, or so the headlines claimed. What they didn't mention was how many people he had stepped on to reach those heights. How many dreams he had crushed under the weight of his ambition. How little regard he had for anyone he considered beneath him. And in Marcus Sullivan's world, nearly everyone was beneath him. Especially the people who made his gleaming empire possible. The janitors. The maintenance staff. The invisible hands that kept his pristine world running while he collected the glory. That morning, he noticed her for the first time, though she had been there for years. Rosa Martinez, 47 years old, with hands weathered by decades of hard work and eyes that carried stories Marcus would never care to hear. She was on her knees, scrubbing the marble floors of the executive lobby, her uniform faded from too many washes, her movements careful and methodical. Beside her sat a boy, perhaps 16, with a backpack clutched between his knees and a worn book open in his lap. He was waiting for his mother to finish her shift, using the early morning hours to study before school began. Marcus stopped walking. Something about the scene irritated him. Perhaps it was the presence of the boy in his pristine lobby. Perhaps it was simply that Rosa's existence reminded him of a world he preferred to ignore. He approached them, his expensive shoes clicking against the very floors Rosa had just cleaned. She looked up, startled, immediately moving to gather her supplies. But Marcus raised a hand. Not to help her, not to offer kindness, but to stop her from leaving before he had finished amusing himself. He noticed something then. On the wall behind them was a digital display panel. One of the new installations meant to showcase company data and stock prices. But the screen was dark, displaying only an error message that had been there for weeks. His entire department had failed to fix it. The system was custom-built, incredibly complex and apparently beyond the capabilities of every expert he employed. It had become an embarrassment, this dead screen in his lobby, but he had grown tired of hearing excuses about encrypted code and system incompatibilities. An idea formed in Marcus Sullivan's mind. A cruel idea born from boredom and privilege. He smiled, and there was nothing warm in it. He looked at Rosa, then at her son, and then he spoke words that would change everything. "Fix this screen," he said, his voice dripping with mockery, pointing at Team. Boiling the dead display. "Fix this technical problem that my entire department of Stanford and MIT graduates cannot solve. Do this, and I will give you my mansion. The one in the hills. The one worth $30 million. He laughed then, a sound like breaking glass. "Do it, and it's yours. But when you fail, and you will fail, I want you to remember something. Remember that there is a place in this world for people like you, and it is not standing in my lobby, pretending to be something you're not. It is on your knees, where you belong, cleaning floors." The silence that followed was suffocating. Other employees had gathered now, drawn by the commotion, watching this public humiliation with a mixture of horror and uncomfortable fascination. Some, for all, looked away, ashamed but silent. Others watched with the same cruel curiosity that makes people slow down to stare at accidents. No one spoke up. No one defended Rosa Martinez or her son. Because in Marcus Sullivan's kingdom, defying the king meant exile. Rosa's face had turned to stone, but her hands trembled as she gripped her cleaning supplies. Years of invisible labor, of dignity maintained through 1,000 small humiliations, of pride swallowed to provide for her family, all of it threatened to crack in this moment. But it was her son who moved. The boy stood slowly, setting his book aside with careful deliberation. His name was David Martinez, and he was 16 years old, though his eyes carried the weight of someone who had seen too much, too soon. He walked toward the dead screen without a word, his mother's hand reaching out as if to pull him back, as if to protect him from this public cruelty. But David gently touched her hand in return, a gesture that said, "Trust me." And he approached the display panel with a calmness that made Marcus Sullivan's smile falter for just a moment. But what happens next will change everything. Because David Martinez was not what he appeared to be. And sometimes, genius wears old shoes and carries a backpack held together with tape. Sometimes brilliance is born in the places where privilege never looks. And sometimes the universe saves its greatest lessons for those who think they have nothing left to learn. David Martinez had been invisible his entire life. Not because he wanted to be, but because the world had decided that boys who look like him, who come from where he comes from, whose mothers clean floors instead of owning buildings, are not worth seeing. In his neighborhood, he was the kid who always had his nose in a book, the one other kids called weird because he preferred circuit boards to basketball courts. At school, he was the quiet one in the back row, the scholarship student whose presence made some teachers uncomfortable and others overly sympathetic, both responses feeling equally suffocating. But in his mind, in the private world of his thoughts, David Martinez was building universes. He taught himself to code at age 9 using a library, computer, and a determination that bordered on obsession. By 12, he had cracked his school's network security just to prove he could, then immediately reported the vulnerabilities to administrators, who dismissed his findings until a later breach proved him right. At 14, he had built a functioning computer from discarded parts found in dumpsters behind electronics stores, components that wealthy people threw away without a second thought, pieces of potential that David saw as treasures, waiting to be transformed. His mother knew he was special. Rosa Martinez might have cleaned floors for a living, but she was not uneducated. She had been a teacher in their home country before circumstances forced them to flee, before immigration, status and language barriers, and the crushing weight of survival transformed her dreams into dust. She worked 3 jobs to keep David in school, to make sure he had notebooks and pencils, and the chance she never had. She watched him study by flashlight when their electricity was cut off. She saw him skip meals so she could eat. She witnessed his hunger, not for food but for knowledge, for opportunity, for a chance to prove that his mind was just as valuable as any child born into wealth. And she was terrified, every single day, that the world would break him before he had a chance to bloom. That morning, standing in Marcus Sullivan's lobby with her son approaching that dead screen, Rosa Martinez felt her heart fracture. Because she knew what would happen. David would try because he was her son, and he had inherited her stubborn refusal to accept defeat. But he would fail, because that is what the world had taught them to expect. And Marcus Sullivan would laugh, would ensure. Everyone saw this failure, would use it as proof that people like them should stay in their place. She wanted to pull him back, to shield him from this public judgment, to tell him that his worth was not measured by whether he could fix a screen for a cruel man's amusement. But David was already there, already studying the display, already lost in a world of possibilities that only he could see. The crowd watched in uncomfortable silence as David examined the panel. Marcus Sullivan crossed his wall arms, his smile widening, anticipating the moment when this child would admit defeat. Some of the employees fidgeted, their conscience whispering things they refused to hear. A few pulled out phones, preparing to capture this humiliation for social media, for laughs at lunch, for proof that they had witnessed the CEO put someone in their place. But David Martinez ignored them all. His fingers moved across the screen's interface with surprising confidence. He tilted his head, studying the error message with the kind of focused intensity that borders on meditation. And then, without asking permission or explaining his actions, he pulled a small toolkit from his backpack. The kind of toolkit a poor kid assembles over years, one piece at a time, because he cannot afford the fancy sets sold in stores. He unscrewed the display's access panel with practiced efficiency, revealing the tangle of wires and circuit boards within. Marcus Sullivan's smile began to fade. This was not what he expected. He expected stammering, confusion, immediate defeat. He did not expect competence, the quiet confidence of someone who knew exactly what he was doing. David worked in silence, his fingers tracing connections, his eyes scanning components, with a speed that suggested not just understanding but mastery. Minutes passed. The crowd grew restless. Some began to whisper. Marcus Sullivan shifted his weight, irritation replacing amusement. This joke was lasting too long. This humiliation was supposed to be swift. Rosa Martinez held her breath, her hands clasped so tightly, her knuckles turned white, her lips moving in silent prayer to a God she hoped was listening. And David, beautiful, brilliant David, pulled out his own laptop from his backpack. It was ancient by technology standards, held together with electrical tape and determination. But when he connected it to the display system, when his fingers began flying across the keyboard with the kind of speed that comes only from thousands of hours of practice, something changed in the room. The whispers stopped. People leaned closer. Even Marcus Sullivan, despite himself, took a step forward. On David's screen, lines of code scrolled past at impossible speeds. He was not just troubleshooting. He was understanding, dissecting, rebuilding. The display system was complex, certainly. It had been custom designed with multiple layers of encryption and proprietary code meant to prevent unauthorized access. But David saw through it, like reading a children's book. He identified the root problem in minutes, a conflict between the encryption protocol and the building's network infrastructure, a problem so fundamental that trained professionals had missed it while looking for more complex explanations. They had been searching for a sophisticated answer when the solution was elegantly simple. David's fingers moved faster now, rewriting sections of code, establishing new protocols, bridging systems that should not have worked together but would now communicate flawlessly. He was not just fixing a problem. He was improving the entire system, making it more efficient, more secure, better than its original design. And all around him, professionals who had spent years in university studying this exact field, watched in growing disbelief as a 16-year-old boy in worn sneakers and a hand-me-down jacket did what they could not. 37 minutes after David Martinez touched that screen, it flickered to life. But it did not just display the error message cleared. It showed a complete system reboot, new interfaces David had created on the fly, data flowing smoothly in arrangements more intuitive than the original design. The display was not just fixed. It was transformed. The lobby erupted in stunned murmurs. Someone started clapping, hesitantly at first, then others joined, the sound building into applause that felt more like shock than celebration. David stepped back from the screen. closing his laptop with the same quiet efficiency he had shown throughout. He looked at Marcus Sullivan for the first time since beginning, and his eyes held something the CEO had never seen directed at him before. Not anger, not triumph, just a quiet statement of fact, a dignity that could not be purchased or destroyed. "I fixed it," David said simply. His voice was steady, calm, betraying none of the nervousness he surely felt. "Your mansion, please. The address, so I can have it transferred to my mother's name. She has cleaned your floors for 12 years without complaint. She has been invisible to you for 12 years while raising me and working multiple jobs to give me opportunities you inherited without effort. She deserves a home where her knees do not ache from kneeling, where her hands can rest from scrubbing, where she can finally breathe without the weight of survival crushing her chest." The silence that followed was different from before. This was not the silence of cruelty watching entertainment. This was the silence of shame recognizing itself. Marcus Sullivan's face had gone through a remarkable transformation in the past half hour. The smug satisfaction had melted into confusion, then disbelief, and now something that looked almost like fear. Because this was not supposed to happen. Poor kids from broken neighborhoods with immigrant mothers who clean floors are not supposed to be geniuses. They are not supposed to solve problems that defeat mid-graduates. They are not supposed to stand with dignity and demand what was promised. They are supposed to fail, to confirm every prejudice, to justify every inequality, to make comfortable people feel comfortable about their comfort. But David Martinez had just shattered that comfortable illusion, and Marcus Sullivan suddenly realized he was standing in front of witnesses who would remember this moment, who might judge him based on what happened next, who were watching to see if a man who built his reputation on innovation would recognize genius when it stood before him in unexpected packaging. The CEO's mouth opened, closed, opened again. He looked at the screen, now functioning perfectly, better than it had ever functioned before. He looked at his IT staff, who stood shamefaced and speechless, unable to explain how they had missed what this teenager had saw. He looked at the crowd, at the phones still recording, at the employees whose respect he commanded through fear and now stood to lose through cowardice. And he looked at David Martinez, really looked at him for the first time, seeing not a poor kid interrupting his morning, but a young man whose mind could have transformed his company if he had possessed the wisdom to recognize it. Marcus Sullivan had built his empire on taking credit for other people's innovations, on buying brilliance and claiming it as his own vision. He knew talent when he saw it, even when pride screamed at him to deny it. And what stood before him was not just talent. It was genius. Raw, untrained, unrealized genius that had been polishing floors and riding buses and studying by flashlight because the world had decided his potential was not worth investing in. For a long moment, Marcus Sullivan teetered on the edge of a choice. He could laugh it off, could call security, could claim the challenge was a joke, and David had not truly earned anything. He could use his power to rewrite reality, as powerful men often do. The world conformed to their narrative rather than truth. Or he could do something he had not done in years. He could be honest. He could be fair. He could acknowledge that he had been wrong, that his prejudice had blinded him, that dignity and genius are not determined by bank accounts or skin color or the work our parents do to survive. The crowd waited. Rosa Martinez stood frozen, her heart suspended between hope and the familiar weight of disappointment. David remained calm, though his hands trembled slightly at his sides, the only sign of the courage it took to stand there demanding justice from a man who could crush him with a word. And Marcus Sullivan, CEO of Sullivan Tech Industries, felt something crack inside his chest. Perhaps it was his ego, finally meeting something it could not deny. Perhaps it was the last remnants of the decent man he had been before wealth transformed him into someone who mocked cleaning women for sport. Or perhaps it was simply exhaustion, the weariness of maintaining cruelty when faced with undeniable truth. He nodded slowly. The gesture was small, almost imperceptible, but in that moment, it felt seismic. He turned to his assistant, a woman who had witnessed this entire scene with growing horror, and now looked at her boss as if seeing him for the first time. "Contact my lawyers," Marcus said quietly. His voice had lost its mocking edge, replaced by something that might have been shame. "Prepare the paperwork to transfer the deed of my hillside property to Rosa Martinez. Full ownership, no conditions, no strings." And then he turned back to David, and when he spoke again, his words carried a weight that made several people in the crowd start crying without fully understanding why. "You solved a problem in 37 minutes that cost me hundreds of thousands in consulting fees over 6 weeks, Marcus said. "You improved a system designed by experts who charge $500 an hour. You did this with worn tools and a laptop held together with tape, using knowledge you taught yourself because no one gave you the resources you deserved. I am many things, most of them not admirable, but I am not stupid enough to let genius walk out of this building without making an offer. David Martinez. I want to offer you a full scholarship to any university you choose, funded entirely by Sullivan Tech Industries. I want to offer your mother a position in our company that has nothing to do with cleaning floors. A position that recognizes her intelligence and her years of dedication. A position with a salary that means she never has to work 3 jobs again. And I want to offer you, when you finish your education, a place in my company. Not as charity, not as apology, but because you have shown me what innovation actually looks like when it is not wrapped in privilege and expensive degrees. You have shown me that I have been blind, and that blindness has cost me and this company more than money. It has cost us perspective. It has cost us humanity. It has cost us the opportunity to recognize brilliance that does not come from the places we expect." The lobby had gone completely silent now. Several employees were openly weeping. Others stood with fists clenched, wrestling with emotions they could not name. Rosa Martinez's knees buckled, and strong hands caught her, helped her to a chair, brought her water while she tried to process words she never thought she would hear. David stood still, his face unreadable, and for a terrible moment, Marcus Sullivan thought he would refuse. Thought this young man might reject the offer out of justified anger, might walk away with his mother and his dignity and leave the CEO with his shame. But then David spoke, and his words carried a wisdom that belied his 16 years. "I accept your offer on 3 conditions, he said. "First, my mother receives full health insurance, retroactive to cover the medical bills she has been hiding from me for 2 years. The ones she accumulated working without coverage, taking care of other people's buildings, while her own body broke down. Second, you create a scholarship program, not just for me, but for 10 students every year from underprivileged backgrounds. Students whose brilliance is invisible because they do not have the right address, or the right last name, or the right color skin. Third, you meet with me once a month for the next year. Not for work, not for business, but so I can teach you what it feels like to be invisible. So you can learn the names of every person who makes this building function. So you understand that genius does not care about poverty and dignity does not require wealth. Do this, and I will help you build something better than an empire. I will help you build something that actually matters." Marcus Sullivan felt tears in his eyes for the first time in decades. He nodded, unable to speak, and extended his hand. David looked at it for a long moment. This hand that had mocked his mother, this hand that represented everything that had kept people like him locked out of opportunity. And then he took it, not because he forgave easily, but because he understood something Marcus was still learning. That growth requires grace. That change requires courage. That the future is built not by people who never make mistakes, but by people brave enough to learn from them. They shook hands in that marble lobby, surrounded by witnesses who would carry this story forward, who would tell their children and their children's children about the morning when a CEO learned humility and a genius received recognition, and a mother who cleaned floors was finally seen for everything she had always been. The news spread through the company within hours. By afternoon, it had reached social media, where videos of David's problem-solving and Marcus's public acknowledgement went viral, sparking conversations about privilege and potential and the countless geniuses the world overlooks because they do not fit our narrow definitions of success. Some praised Marcus Sullivan for his change of heart. Others rightfully pointed out that one good deed does not erase years of cruelty, that systemic change requires more than individual transformation. But everyone agreed on one thing. David Martinez was extraordinary, and his mother, Rosa Martinez, who had raised him with love and sacrifice, and an unshakable belief that he could be anything despite a world that told him otherwise, she was extraordinary too. The mansion transfer took 3 weeks to complete. When Rosa Martinez walked into her new home for the first time, she collapsed in the foyer, sobbing so hard she could not breathe. David held her, this woman who had held him through every hardship, and whispered that she never had to kneel again unless she chose to. Her hands would heal now. Her body would rest. And her son, her beautiful, brilliant son, would have opportunities to match his potential. Marcus Sullivan kept his promises. The scholarship program launched that fall, changing 10 lives immediately and countless more in the years that followed. He met with David monthly, awkward conversations at first, filled with uncomfortable truths and painful recognitions. But slowly, something shifted. Marcus began learning names. He started seeing people he had walked past for years without acknowledgement. He funded programs supporting his lowest-paid workers. He could not undo years of harm, but he could stop causing new harm. He could build something different going forward. And he learned, through David's patient teaching and Rosa's quiet dignity, that wealth without humanity is just expensive loneliness. David Martinez graduated high school at the top of his class. He received scholarship offers from every major university, but he chose Stanford, not because it was prestigious, but because it allowed him to stay close to his mother during her adjustment to their new life. She who studied computer science and social justice, understanding that technology without ethics is just power without purpose. He interned at Sullivan Tech during summers, bringing fresh perspectives and advocating for diversity initiatives that transformed the company's culture. And he never forgot where he came from. Never forgot the invisible people doing invisible work. Never forgot that his genius was not his alone, but a gift made possible by his mother's sacrifice and the determination of a community that believed in him when the world did not. By the time David graduated college, he had already filed 17 patents and been courted by every major tech company in the world. But he chose to work with Marcus Sullivan, not because of loyalty, but because he saw potential for real change. Together, they built programs bringing technology education to underprivileged communities. They created hiring initiatives that looked for talent in places traditionally ignored. They proved that innovation flourishes when opportunity is distributed equitably, when genius is recognized regardless of packaging, when dignity is extended to all people equally. Rosa Martinez never worked another cleaning job. She became the director of community relations at Sullivan Tech, a position created specifically for her, one that recognized her decades of experience observing how workplaces function and fail. how employees are treated and mistreated, how small kindnesses or cruelties shape entire cultures. She spoke at conferences about dignity in the workplace. She mentored young women navigating corporate environments while raising families. She became, in her own quiet way, as influential as her son, proving that wisdom earned through hardship is just as valuable as knowledge gained through privilege. The mansion in the hills became more than a home. It became a gathering place for students from David's scholarship program, a refuge for families needing temporary shelter during hardships, a reminder that wealth means nothing if it is not shared, that success is hollow if it is not used to lift others. Rosa filled its rooms with laughter and cooking smells, and the sound of children playing, transforming a monument to excess into a testament to generosity. And sometimes, late at night when the house was quiet, she would stand at the window looking out over the city lights and weep, not from sadness, but from overwhelming gratitude that her son had been seen, that her son had been seen. Her work had been valued, that their lives had changed not through luck, but through the universe, finally recognizing what she had always known, that they were worthy, that they mattered, that dignity is not earned through labor, but inherent in existence. Years later, when David Martinez had become a leading voice in ethical technology, and Rosa had retired to spend her days gardening in soil that was finally her own, Marcus Sullivan gave an interview that became legendary in business circles. He was asked about his greatest accomplishment, expecting him to cite profit margins or market dominance or the innovations that made his company a household name. Instead, he spoke about a Tuesday morning when a 16-year-old boy taught him more about leadership than any MBA program ever had. He spoke about learning to see invisible people, about recognizing that ego is expensive and cruelty is wasteful, and the greatest innovations often come from the places we least expect if we are wise enough to look. I mocked a woman who made my world possible, Marcus said quietly. I mocked her son who possessed more natural talent than anyone in my entire organization. I nearly let genius slip through my fingers because I could not see past my own prejudice. That day cost me my mansion, but it saved my soul. It taught me that true wealth is measured not in what we own, but in how we treat people who can do nothing for us. In whether we have the courage to admit when we are wrong. In whether we use our power to build barriers or open doors. David and Rosa Martinez changed my life. They changed my company. And I hope, in some small way, I was able to change too. This is what the story of David Martinez and Rosa Martinez teaches us. That genius exists everywhere, in every neighborhood, behind every door, waiting only for opportunity and recognition. That the people we dismiss as invisible are often the ones carrying the most profound wisdom and capability. That privilege blinds us to potential, that power corrupts perspective, that wealth without empathy is just sophisticated poverty of spirit. It teaches us that mothers who clean floors are warriors fighting battles we never see, sacrificing dreams so their children can dream bigger. That children born into hardship often develop resilience and creativity that comfortable lives never cultivate. That the universe has a way of balancing scales, of revealing truth, of ensuring that arrogance eventually meets reality. It teaches us that change is possible, that cruel people can learn compassion, that systems built on inequality can be dismantled and rebuilt with justice. That one moment of recognition, one act of fairness, one choice to see humanity in unexpected places can ripple outward in ways we cannot imagine, touching lives and altering futures and reshaping what we believe is possible. But most importantly, it teaches us about dignity, about the inherent worth that exists in every human being regardless of circumstances. about how that dignity cannot be taken by mockery or diminished by poverty or erased by prejudice, about how it persists, quiet and unbreakable, waiting for the moment when it will finally be acknowledged. Rosa Martinez possessed dignity when she was on her knees scrubbing floors. David Martinez possessed genius when he was studying by flashlight in a neighborhood the wealthy never visit. Marcus Sullivan learned that recognizing these truths did not diminish him but elevated him, that celebrating others' worth does not reduce our own, that the world has enough abundance for everyone if we stop hoarding opportunity like frightened children protecting toys. So if this story touched your heart, if it made you think about the invisible people in your own life, if it challenged you to look beyond surface judgments and recognize the potential hidden in plain sight, then let it change you. Let it make you kinder. Let it make you see cleaning staff and service workers and anyone society deems unimportant as the complete human beings they are, carrying stories and dreams and capabilities you have never bothered to discover. Let it inspire you to create opportunities where they did not exist before, to speak up when you witness injustice, to use whatever privilege or power you possess, not to elevate yourself, but to lift others, to understand that we are all connected, that humanity is a tapestry woven from every thread, that we rise or fall together regardless of how much we pretend otherwise. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Someone who has been dismissed or overlooked or told they are not enough. Share it with someone who has power and has forgotten what it is. 4. Share it with children so they learn early that worth is not measured by wealth, that intelligence comes in countless forms, that the most important thing we can do in this life is recognize and celebrate the humanity in every person we encounter. Subscribe to hear more stories like this. Stories that reveal uncomfortable truths and celebrate unsung heroes and remind us that the world is full of David Martinezes waiting only for someone to see them, someone to believe in them, someone to believe in them, someone to offer the opportunity that talent and determination alone cannot create in a system built to keep them out. Stories that prove love is stronger than cruelty, that justice eventually prevails, that the human spirit cannot be broken by circumstance only temporarily constrained, waiting for the moment when it can finally soar. Because every story hides a truth, and every truth deserves to be heard. The truth that genius wears old shoes. The truth that dignity requires no mansion. The truth that a mother's love can move mountains even when the world tries to convince her she is powerless. The truth that sometimes the people we mock today hold our future in their capable hands. The truth that we are all, every single one of us, one encounter away from transformation, if we have the courage to truly see each other. This is the truth that Rosa and David Martinez embodied that Tuesday morning in a marble lobby. This is the truth that Marcus Sullivan learned when pride cracked and revealed the human beneath. This is the truth that the universe whispers constantly if we quiet our prejudice long enough to listen. That we are all worthy. We are all capable. We are all deserving of recognition and opportunity and the chance to contribute our unique gifts to a world that needs every single one of them. Remember this story when you are tempted to judge by appearance. Remember it when you have power over someone vulnerable. Remember it when you see someone invisible and choose whether to keep walking or finally stop and truly see them. Because that choice, that simple choice to recognize humanity in unexpected places, that choice might just save someone's life, or it might save your own soul. And in the end, perhaps, those are the same thing.